Why, hello there. Welcome to Smart Aspirations with Justin Huff. Sit back, chill out, and go on a journey around the world. Around the world. Justin will discuss tales of hope, discovery, and general irreverence with some of the most dynamic personalities in the travel business. Remember, we do cool shit, and so can you.
Jumbo, everyone, thanks for tuning in and welcome to another episode of Smart Aspirations with Justin Huff. Today, I've got a superstar with me right now. Brandon Kemp joins us from Asilia, Africa, from his home in Cape Town. Brandon is in charge. I'm not sure what your official title is with what you're doing out in Usangu, but you are the Usangu god, so to speak.
Yeah. Thanks, Justin. Great to be on your show. It's really a privilege to be able to spread the word of what we're trying to do, and thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, pleasure.
So I have been the country director for Asilia, Tanzania, and in the last 2 years, I've changed my focus a little bit. Well, the company's helped me change my focus just to concentrate on the small business that we have in southern Tanzania, and predominantly new business development is what's taking up a lot of my time.
Awesome.
And of course, Usangu is what fits into that sort of new business development, which seems to be expanding, hopefully quite fast at the moment.
Well, Usangu is very much off the beaten path from a normal safari circuit, which is part of the allure. And one of the things we love doing at Swaggy Swan Travel is promoting these undiscovered gems throughout the world. And I'm sure that they wouldn't just let anybody with some safari experience head such a massive, really cool, groundbreaking project. Did you've got a really interesting and diverse background with how you made it into wildlife conservation. Tell us a little bit about your history and what got you here in the first place.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of sort of sneaked in the back door in a way, if you like. Growing up in South Africa, obviously you spend a lot of time going to the parks. As a kid, we had definitely once a year and sometimes more than that family trip into the Ruaha National Park. My uncle owned a small lodge at the time in the Sabi Sands, which he didn't even understand the value of, and so we spent quite a lot of time there as a kid, and obviously had a baseline passion for all of that in the growing up stage. I then went to a boarding school in KwaZulu Natal near a place called Pietermaritzburg. And I went to university in Pietermaritzburg after that as well, and got kind of a bit, let's say, waylaid from the bush side of things. And in my time at university, I actually started to play more and more rugby and do less and less studies and things like that. And ended up playing provincial rugby in South Africa. And towards the end of my university career, we had an opportunity to go and play rugby in Australia. And a good friend of mine and I went and spent one season in Australia. And we were really lucky. We just had a very good season where we sort of stuck out a little bit. And surprisingly, we got headhunted by a Japanese corporation. You can imagine, growing up in, let's say, apartheid South Africa, it's quite a closed society and stuff like that. And then suddenly we're in Australia, which was, very interesting for us. And then to be offered to go to Japan. I remember saying to my mom, I don't know what I'm going to do because fish is not my favorite thing. So, I had this concept that I only ate fish. So, I was a bit worried about how I'm going to keep the weight on to continue playing rugby. But obviously that was a very short-sighted approach because the food in Japan is so diverse and so delicious.
So good.
There was no problem at all. So then my friend and I took on a contract and we spent 3 years in Japan. I think the most interesting part about playing a sport in Japan, especially like a team sport, as opposed to going there for a work scenario, is that you really, you make very strong bonds with the people that you play with. So I think in many respects, we were invited into sort of, let's say, behind the scenes stuff that probably a normal gaijin, as they call this, would not necessarily have had access to. I'm talking about kind of semi-religious functions, dinners and barbecues at people's houses, which is a little unusual. The Japanese are not necessarily taking you into their house. They love to take you out to a restaurant or something like that.
Right.
And we're involved in a whole bunch of different things. I remember once we had to carry around this massive wooden cart, which was like a sort of Shinto temple type thing. And because my friend and I were so much taller than everyone else, we actually ended up carrying the entire cart because no one else's shoulders could touch the sort of wooden part in front that you would draw, draw the cart around us. We had some really interesting experiences, and it was a great opportunity, and really, really loved it. But at some point it was like, sure, I don't think I'm ever going to have the dedication in rugby to play for my country. So maybe it's time to look at doing something else. And I was booked into an IT course in London with a bunch of my friends from university. This was 2007. And I had about a 3-month break before that course started. And a friend of mine was working at a place called Sabi Sabi. I don't know if you know it, in the Sabi Sands.
I've got brief interruption. The last podcast episode that I did was Jan from Sabi Sabi.
Oh, no ways.
Yeah.
So I went along. They said they've got a big incentive group for about a 2-week period, and they just needed a kind of coordinator, someone who sat in the lobby and said, Justin, you're going on game drive, and ma'am, you're off on a walk this morning, and just got on really well with the camp manager at the time, a guy called Tony Rumerman. And he said, well, we've got a guide training course coming up in about 5 days' time, once this incentive group's over. And we've got a couple of slots left. We're going to take 8 people, and we're going to choose 3. And you seem to have a good attitude. Would you like to give this a try? So I was like, well, yeah, why not? I've got 3 months to go until I'm booked into my course, my IT course. I meant to think about it. I don't even know how I'm on the Zoom call if it wasn't for my wife. I went over and did the guide training thing, and geez, just absolutely loved it. And one thing grew into another. And then at some point I was, heading up all sorts of training aspects at Sabi Sabi. And then, to be honest, the bush got a bit small for me. Okay. And I don't really know exactly what pinpointed it. It might have been also that I had met my now wife, then girlfriend at the time. She was working at a place called Singita.
Yeah, of course.
And we both just had a feeling like it was just, I don't know, too many. I don't want to dish the place. I love it, but just felt that it was a bit small for kind of our spirits in a way. So
that makes sense.
We made a move in the year 2000 to join Wilderness Safaris.
Okay.
In Botswana.
Sure.
And we both carried on guiding actually for a little bit, but more in the camp management role. Mm-hmm. We started off in relief management in the Linyanti Game Reserve.
Oh, love it up there.
Yeah, and then got permanent management, and my wife eventually stopped guiding, and I carried on guiding. I got my Botswana guide's license. It's nice to be a camp manager and guide when you have special guests or agents or something like that. So I kept that current. And we spent from 2000 to 2003 in the Linyanti. And then I got offered the opportunity to run Mambo, which I think hopefully a lot of viewers will know, a great destination and probably the flagship of Wilderness Safaris in the Okavango. And I spent 2003 till about 2007 at Mambo, and my wife ran Little Mambo and I ran Mambo, and it was just a great time. What a beautiful place to get inspired about, wildlife and space and everything like that. And from there, promotion into operations management. So I still oversaw Mambo, but from a bigger picture perspective, and got involved in a few of the other concession areas. And then eventually chief of operations of Wilderness Safaris Botswana.
It's huge.
And that was great fun. Really enjoyed it. Loved my job. And then we moved to Namibia to focus a little bit more on the guest experience there, still with Wilderness Safaris, and oversaw basically the operational running of Wilderness Safaris Namibia for 2 years. And then got offered an amazing opportunity to join Asspirations in Tanzania in 2014. Okay. And I have been there since. Yeah, so we spent, at the time in 2014, Ascilia was still a company that was kind of growing up, and it was nice to come from a big business like Wilderness Safaris to a smaller business with, let's say, less corporate structure within it, so that decision making was a lot more fluid. And I would say a lot of the more like left field ideas that I might have had in Wilderness that just would never fly. I was very much able to employ or instill in the Ascilia framework. And so, yeah, we started to do a lot of interesting stuff where, we were making camps that were a little bit different. I'm sure you've probably seen the domes in Highlands, the new Olakira with a great
the stargazing.
Yeah, the stargazing bedroom with the wheels that roll out. We learned these are all kind of ideas that we had touched and played with and never really implemented. And thanks to my boss, Jeroen Hardewijk, after the first year, he was checking me out to see what I did. But after year one, when I kind of proved myself, he gave me an extreme amount of leeway and confidence in what I did. And yeah, I think we definitely took Ascilia into a new kind of space.
Was the solar powered brewery at Sayari your idea then?
Actually, it wasn't, but I was very much in favor of it. What I did do was I was the person who was closest to the brewery site. There's a guy in Tanzania who works with that company who was brewing beer. And so I went and spent a few days there making sure that the 4 different beers that we got covered the right spectrum for the international clientele.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Only one way to test that. Yeah.
I think it's actually better than building the plant is making sure that in tasting that you get the right beer in the plant.
Yeah. Got to get the right product.
Yeah, and I think with that creativity and always a drive within myself to want to do new things and break new ground and stabilize, let's say, places that haven't necessarily worked well in the past. It was a natural move to be focused on our new business in southern Tanzania and now a new business development in things like Usangu.
Awesome. And speaking of Usangu, I'm going to put some helpful maps up for the YouTube video for people that this might be a brand new word. Southern Tanzania might be off people's radars. So could you give us a kind of overview of the greater Ruaha, Usangu, maybe even all of southern Tanzania ecosystems and the main highlights there so people understand?
Yeah, sure. I think without a doubt, the last intact savanna wilderness left in Africa of big proportion is in southern Tanzania.
Okay.
But I suppose southern Sudan probably could fall into that category. Congo, Central African Republic. Personally, I'd be a little nervous of day-to-day runnings in areas like that. And so Tanzania is a very safe and soft option for that.
Absolutely.
But it still carries the immense tracts of land that are so necessary to elephant populations, lion populations of the rest of Africa. These are pretty much breeding centers, if you like, and animals will move out from there. The fact that southern Tanzania or Tanzania is not fenced creates a big migratory opportunity for things like lions and elephants. Mm-hmm. Obviously, with an increasing human population, those are all under threat. And hence the need for companies like Ascilia and hopefully others to follow suit, to try and find a meaningful or sustainable land use for those areas that typically up till now have not really contributed much to the government. And hence they kind of take a back seat. And of course, as soon as you have national parks without any form of security in them, people naturally move in there. They need space for their cattle. They need firewood. And so you get this sort of slow degradation of the outer reaches of these areas. So within that great space, there are many famous names, or let's say less famous names. The Selous Game Reserve itself, which is 56,000 square kilometers, and I suppose one of the biggest savanna parks in the world.
Enormous.
Ruaha was at the time the biggest national park in Africa. Obviously, the new Ruaha National Park, which is about 60% of what was the Selous Game Reserve, is now the biggest. But I think Ruaha has about 21,000 square kilometers, and a place like the Kruger National Park or the Okavango sit around 18,000.
Right.
So it's a good chunk bigger than that. And we started operating in there in 2000 and towards the end of 2014.
Okay.
There obviously been quite a few people operating there historically for some years. And yeah, just fell in love with the area, fell in love with the wildness of it, the lack of people, the space, the beauty. I mean, it's mountainous, it's got rivers, it's just a spectacular piece of land. And while we were in that space, we we're kind of like looking around and going, geez, but this place is huge, but everyone just conducts themselves around the sort of Msembe, Magusi general area. And surely there's much more to this park. And, then someone said, yeah, there's a wetland. And now, whenever I hear the word wetland, after all my years in the Okavango, I get very excited.
Different.
Yeah, because I think of a boat, and then I think of fish, and then I think of driving around in a boat and fishing and not bouncing around in a car so much. And so that stuff really appeals to me. So in 2015, I think it was July, we took a trip out there. So it was myself, a guy called Akil, who was our operations manager at the time, and Lorenzo, who was the guide at Kwihala, and a Tanapa ranger. And we took enough supplies. Akil told me not to take a mattress because he said, no, don't worry, the ground is so soft next to the river there. I mean, it was rock hard clay. So we had to spend 5 nights sleeping on the floor there. We got so badly stuck. There was a point, if we hadn't got out of there, we might never have got out of there, actually, now that I think of it. And just an adventure, we try to access the swamp or the wetland from a certain way, which was just crazy. We broke the chassis of the car. It was so bumpy. You've got this massive floodplain which fills up with water, and then you've got a huge amount of animals that move through there. So you get these kind of like pockmarked landscapes, which was just ridiculous to drive over. And we literally cracked the chassis of a Toyota Land Cruiser, which is a hardy car.
It's hard to do, yeah.
Then we drove all the way around and we tried to access from the river up. And that's when we just realized how special this place was. I mean, it's incredible. I don't know if any of your viewers have spent much time in Botswana, but there's a very famous place in Botswana called the Savuti Marsh.
Absolutely.
Now, I've spent some time there, and I was impressed with that. I mean, this place has to be 20 times the size of the Savuti Marsh. Right. I mean, there are parts of Usangu where you cannot see the other end. It's more a bit like the Makhadi as opposed to the Savuti. And within that space, you've got big open grassland, you've got riverine forest, herds of sable. On our first trip, we saw a herd of 56 sable, which I've never heard of it. Anything
sable or anything close to that.
In the Okavango, you see groups of maybe up to 15 or 20, and that's a considerable amount. But just to see the abundance of some special animals that you don't really expect to find. There's topi in there. There's no topi in the rest of Ruaha or the Selous. So as there's kind of that barrier. How did the topi get there? And so just a super interesting place. And of course, wetlands across the world are, very important places. They're all under threat. Mostly because of human activity upstream or in the wetland themselves. Right. And the Usangu is no different. It's a beautiful, intact wetland at this stage, but it comes with a lot of threats and issues. Farming outside of the park, upstream, they've diverted a lot of the water for rice farming, and that obviously affects the overall volume of water, which affects the size of the wetland. Inside the wetland itself, a lot of poaching going on at the moment. It's subsistence stuff. You can understand.
It's all
these people are desperate.
Yeah.
But also a lot of cattle going in there, again, mostly for water and food. But what the cattle are doing is they're eating a lot of the floating vegetation, which limits evaporation. And further enhancing the shrinking of this wetland. There's some maps and stuff that I'll also share with you that you can share with your viewers that show the shrinking of the swamp from, let's say the late 1980s until today. And it's just on a continuous trajectory of getting smaller and smaller. So this place needs protection. It's a host to a wonderful variety of animals and birds. And a wetland is just a unique spot that should be foremost on anyone's list if they're involved in any form of conservation. And so this became just a very appealing a place for me. And, I'm kind of wondering all the time, why can't we get a camp in here? And at first they didn't want us to, the government didn't necessarily want us to have a camp in there. I think, there's a lot of stuff that probably needs to have gone ahead before us. But what we did do is I was like, sure, no one's really spent time here except for some hunters before. Let's see if we can, and I had just made contact with some members of Tawiri. Let's see if we can do a biodiversity audit of this area. Now, we're not a scientists, we're a tourism company. And if you look at the way most research projects are structured in rural parts of Africa, and especially in Tanzania, it tends to be a European university or an American university that come in with their scientists and their experts and get permission to do a research project of some form. And our philosophy was, no, we would like to make Tanzanians do this project.
Okay.
And we would like to assist them wherever we can to being better equipped and better enabled to actually do this project. So growing Tanzanians at the same time has always been at the forefront of how we try to do things. And so it was with this in mind that we took a bit of a gamble and said, hey, can we apply to do a biodiversity audit of the Usangu wetland? There I was thinking, yeah, whatever, no chance. You need to be a PhD student from, Columbia University or whatever. And sure, 3 months later, it came back with a yes. So I was like, ooh, okay, well, now we better get ourselves
we got to do it.
a bit more organized. So we went off and we were very lucky enough in that a wonderful man who's one of our investors in southern Tanzania, a guy called Jim Ratcliffe, very much interested in sustainability and kind of conservation legacy. And him and our other big partner in Asilia is Norfund, which is the Norwegian sovereign fund. Right. And we were able to convince both of these people that this was a project worth doing and get them excited about it. And so they were happy to pass over the responsibility for us to manage the funds that they would be donating towards this project. So that was in 2017 when we
relatively recent.
Yeah, so we first got our funding and we went in there, let's say towards the end of 2017, 2018 to conduct a very large scale biodiversity audit, just to find out what is actually in there. The intention or the thinking was that we'll always find a frog or a small mammal or something that's never been seen elsewhere in the world. So that was kind of a bit of the history of how we got into Usangu. And I think one of the differences as well is that when we have been doing this, the consideration has always been towards the tourism angle of it.
Yeah.
You can have a research project and let's say a conservation project. They go and they don't want anything to do with tourists. And then the researchers leave. They write a very beautiful scientific paper that gets posted on the internet that hardly anyone ever reads. And the conservation people don't necessarily do what they do with any form of tourism in mind. So when they deem an area ready, they'll, invite, let's say, a company like Asilia in there and say, well, here we go. Here's a piece of land where we think you can do tourism. And, the roads are based around the best practice for conservation, not the best practice for tourism. And it's a very different story. And so I think for me, anyway, the interesting part of our model is that, we're not trying to practice conservation. We're trying to support conservation. We're not trying to practice research. We're trying to support research. What we are doing, though, is helping the government, in this case, to say, wow, this area really does have potential and you must make this open and available because you will get other tourism companies that come in here. But instead of having a road that just goes straight through the middle of, the back end of the Miombo woodland, let's have a road that hugs the river system and a couple of loops that go into the Miombo and back down. So that's kind of where we're coming at it from. And obviously, under these projects, we also have donors who will come and interact with various research activities. But obviously have to be donors to the project, so they can't just be some people messing about it. It does cost money in order to keep these projects going. And at the same time, while we have those donors, we're practicing various tourism activities to see what works and what doesn't. So it's kind of a bit of a different look at how you would develop an area. But I think it's the right way to look at it. Quite often what happens is the researchers leave, the conservationist people hand over and kind of back off. And then it takes you about 5 years to develop your tourism product anyway. Right. So I think the thing that's remarkable about our product, and believe me, this is not something that we sat down and planned, it's something that's happened over time, is that when we have finished the 5-year, let's say, biodiversity audits and the support of the conservation, various conservation aspects of the area, that place is ready for tourism. It's ready from day one. And I think that's a great model, and I would like to be able to repeat it in other places, and urge other companies to adapt to it. I'm very happy to share a lot of how we got to where we are and the methodologies and the thinking behind it, because I think it's deserved of these wonderful wild places.
Well, absolutely. And in terms of the projects themselves, I'm often fascinated with, from a tourism's perspective too, about how guests can be involved and what they can experience. What research projects are going on currently in terms of like camera traps or collaring that you can talk about that you've set up and that are still ongoing in the area?
Yeah, so we have, this biodiversity audit is ongoing. What we originally started with was collaring of some key species like the roan and the sable, to try and see what are their movements in and out of this wetland. You don't see them on the other side of Ruaha. And so what's keeping them there? How far do they go? Where do they go? Similarly with lions, we wanted to sort of understand their movements and also to be aware of how much impact they would have on the human wildlife conflict by going into village areas. Right. Similarly with wild dogs, because it gives you a good understanding. Unfortunately, in those 6,000 square kilometers, and we have had 2 hard years. One was the 100-year biggest flood in Ruaha, and then obviously the coronavirus pandemic. But we haven't managed to we've seen wild dogs, but never when we're prepared to try and collar them. So they're still being a little bit elusive. But you can imagine 2 vehicles, one from the research people and one from us, driving around in a 6,000 square kilometer wilderness, trying to find a small pack of wild dogs with a limited road network. It's pretty tough going. But
oh my God, I can't imagine. But man, if you got wild dogs on that would just be complete magic, especially in that area. Oh my God.
Yeah. So the concept is to better understand some of the movements of key animal species that the Tanzanian Research Institute, Tawiri, had decided that would be of interest to them. And then obviously to measure the changes from consumptive to non-consumptive, which I find very fascinating. I was involved in Botswana when we were turning a lot of hunting blocks into non-hunting. But no one was ever really documenting exactly what was going on. Did we have 500 buffalo when we start, and now we have 1,500? So there are some places where that's been done, but certainly not many that I've had the opportunity to work in, and I don't think enough of that kind of research has been done. So that's kind of the lay down of the project. So within that space, we've done collaring. We set out 120 kilometer long camera trap exercise. So we had 60 cameras placed 2 kilometers apart. We specifically chose to put these cameras in the bush, not on the roads, because roads give you a bit of a false reading because animals like to use them.
Of course.
And we've just managed to get all of that all that data. You can imagine it's crazy. It's something like 150,000 images or something.
Huge tract of land that you're doing that to. I mean, my God.
Yeah, and so we've managed to record every single species that should be in the Ruaha, including a never before recorded grijsbok, which is a small little antelope, like kind of a dike.
It sounds like an antelope, but not one that I've heard of before. How do you spell it? What is it?
Grys. Grysbok. Grysbok.
Gerrisbok. Okay, wow.
Yeah, it's that Afrikaans thing, or
Yeah.
Dutch or whatever. So that was interesting. But I mean, geez, everything. Aardvark, leopards, wild dogs, porcupines, serval, you name it, caracal, everything is there. Obviously not rhinoceros at this stage. And then, this never been recorded in the history of Ruaha Grysbok, which we have on camera. So, that's meaningful stuff. And the cameras are being deployed again coming up this year. So we're going to change the methodology and the area a little bit and just see what else is out there. Then we've done small mammal traps where we've caught a shrew, which has actually been sent to the University of Columbia for genetic analysis, because no one could identify it offhand. And so that could also be another, an elephant shrew, it could be another species. We have done dry season bird counts and wet season bird counts. A couple of interesting things in there, but no big surprises. And we still are busy embarking on the fish side of things. So we're going to catch, do a little bit of netting and releasing and identifying. And, there's a technique where you can shock the water and the fish come up and you can ID them and then let them go back down alive. So I think that's the major sort of stuff that we've been doing. So, and vegetation counts as well. We're doing transects, small transects to understand what vegetation is within those transects. And any outliers. So it is a biodiversity audit, which is basically recording what is there from a biological perspective in that particular area.
And in terms of guest experiences, I know that this obviously isn't this is by design is not a huge drive for volume, but guests can get involved with going down to Usangu. What's an idea of what guests can get involved in other than like going on a game drive, or and what are the accommodations like at the moment?
Sure. So for those of you who are familiar with Asspirations, you might remember kind of our mobile camps. They're sort of standard. We had a camp which did really well for us in the Serengeti called Namiri.
Yes.
Which actually was meant for Mozambique. Interesting.
I had no idea. Really?
Yeah, it used to be called Kubatana. It was on its way to Mozambique, and then they had that.
Was that the one that was going to go in Gorongosa?
Correct.
Okay. Cool.
Then there was an internal struggle broke out, and it was deemed not the safest place to be at the time. So we moved that camp to Namiri. That was actually as I arrived in Asspirations. And that camp served us really well, but obviously with the popularity of the area, it was decided to sort of upgrade to a nicer, sort of smarter, let's say, camp. And so I've got my old friend back, and it's 4 tents. They're en suite, bucket shower, flushing. Yeah, 2 lovely main areas, a dining room and a lounge. And so it's it's simple, it's small, it's eight guests maximum. But you're in a 6,000 square kilometer wilderness. The nearest camp is about a 3-hour drive away.
Imagine that.
Yeah. And that's also a small camp. So there's really just nothing going on out there in terms of people. So you've just got this. And we put it up on the sort of ridge that overlooks what they call the Ihefu Plains, which is basically the Usangu land. And so you've just got this endless view, kind of Makadi style in certain directions. And there's some mountains in the background. So the accommodations are great. Flushing loos, bucket showers, very comfortable beds, big enough rooms. We're going to have great food. We're going to keep it kind of nice and simple. We like to cook as much as we can on a fire. I think it brings you back a little bit more to that kind of original safari feeling. And basic electricity. Yes, you'll be able to charge your phones and stuff. I don't think we'll have Wi-Fi, not just yet.
Cool.
But there's an emergency satellite phone, and we do have, communications with people close. When I say close by, Quihala, which is about a 6-hour drive.
Quihala, they can go away from there. My God.
I think it's 6 hours back to that side of Ruaha.
Well, I think that given present circumstances, a private buyout of that camp to have all for yourself in such a remote, cool area what a great way for natural social distancing by default, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, if you went in with your own group, I mean, yeah, there's just, yeah, it is probably the most socially distanced place besides the middle of the Sahara Desert, nearly.
Right.
Yeah,
probably a lot safer too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, within the space of the camp, you also get obviously one of our professional guides who is armed, who conducts walking safaris. We have a boat with one of these crazy new. It's actually an engine from Louisiana. It's called the Go Devil.
Nice.
I don't know if you've heard.
That was really good.
Yeah, they're pretty cool, man. They can go in very shallow water, which is what we're looking for, because often, that wetland is knee deep in a lot of places. So we'll be able to tour around on there when the water's high enough, and when the water drops, we just go into the river system and tour around by that.
Okay.
We can do night drives. I think a big part of what's going to happen is these collared animals, like particularly the lions, have to be habituated sometime. Right. So that could be quite interesting. We're going to have to habituate them by car first. So there'll be a couple of scary moments where they run and sort of growl at the car, but it doesn't take that long for them to get used to that. But I suppose the more interesting one for those brave tourists out there will be when we try and habituate them on foot, because that's a different story.
It's a totally different.
Having a big male lion running right at you, and you've got to just hold your nerve and hold your ground and just hope like hell he doesn't carry on, which they normally don't.
I'm going to publicly volunteer to be your guinea pig for that experience.
Justin, I would put you right in the front. Yeah, and then we also managed to get sport fishing approved this year, which has never been allowed in Ruaha before. Obviously, the target species there would be tigerfish, which is a fish that speaks for itself in terms of its excitement and known as one of the big apex predators of the freshwater systems of Africa. There's night drives, bush meals. We started quite a cool little restaurant. So what we do is we pay the government every time we host guests there the maximum park fees possible. So we pay night drive, we pay long walking, which means you can do more than one walk in a day. Okay. We pay 2 bush meals a day, and we pay all of this with whether we do those activities or not. So what's quite nice is we'll always have a little what I call a braai grid, or what people would probably understand as a barbecue grid, in the back of the car with some food. And if it gets like being a really long day, we find a beautiful place to pull over, and we start a little fire and we make a little barbecue there. So we started a restaurant called the Poacher's Grill, which has caused a lot of laughter and fun amongst the few guests that we've had in Usangu. At this stage, everyone who's visited is a donor, but we're certainly getting to the point where we will be welcoming normal guests. And a lot of the research activities, or let's say the research follow-ups, don't necessarily require a donor. We've got a telemetry set where we would drive around and stop and see if we can find where the lions are, and then part of the project is to go and habituate those animals over time. So there's a bunch of stuff that is kind of like normal safari stuff, and then there's a bunch of kind of add-ons that are necessary to keep the project going, that guests would just automatically be involved in through the nature of our guide. So our head guide there, and he might not be there forever because we've got hopefully some other projects coming on, but he is the project lead on the ground for the Usangu research project as well as the guide at this stage in the game.
Are there, speaking of future projects, are there anything that you could actually mention yet? Any secret stuff in the works?
So yeah, sort of. I can give you a teaser though, to say that
no worries.
We're busy in the process of applying through the same process, the biodiversity audit and the dynamic measurement of change between hunting and non-hunting in what is now called Ruaha National Park, which was Selous. So yeah, cross fingers that comes through. And it could be as early as the end of this year that we run a similar project to Usangu, just in the Selous side.
That would be amazing. And that land is
Yeah,
so enormous, and I just think there's so much opportunity with that.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, a lot of both of these parts of land are dense miombo, but that's fascinating in itself. It's not a huge, doesn't carry a huge amount of animals within it, but there's a lot of interesting animals in there, and it creates to that overall total wilderness. I mean, if you think about Usangu, it's, let's say, 1/3 of the Kruger National Park or 1/3 of the Okavango, and that's a big space. If you think about how many camps and roads and tar roads, if we take the Kruger Park version of that, and we are one lodge in that 6,000 square kilometers, and we only have 4 tents. It's not even like we're a big lodge,
Right.
So it's wilderness on the next level from a space perspective, and the numbers of animals are just coming back incredibly well. And the more support we get, and the more people we have out there, the more the Tanzania National Parks Authority have to come with us and practice more conservation techniques that just, it's self-perpetuating. It's got to make the area better and better and better all the time.
Well, you had mentioned the activities like walking safaris and night game drives and sports fishing, of course, and across Africa, not specifically Tanzania. I mean, those activities are prohibited in a lot of the national parks throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And mostly you do those things in private conservancies. Do you see, I mean, the benefits of private conservancies and how they sustain local communities and environments for future generations. Do you see that really taking off in Tanzania, which has historically been a national park destination?
So we as Asspirations have been working on this concept for quite a few years now, parallel to what I'm doing in Usangu, and I've also been heading up that part of it. And I think the simple answer is, hopefully, yes.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few sort of tricky aspects to it in the Tanzanian context. First of all, the reason why it should work is there is just so much unused land. Yeah. And as soon as you don't have a presence in a piece of land, it is natural for humans to move their cattle in there because they need better grazing for their cattle, and to start cutting down trees. For home use, building, fires, whatever it is.
Of course.
And there are many examples of tracts of land in Tanzania that just don't have that attraction. Now, if you were to try and just emulate the standard national park, let's say, behavior of the Serengeti, mm-hmm. in a place like Ruaha, which is more like, Botswana or Zambia or Zimbabwe in terms of volume of animals, I just don't know that you would ever get the tourist numbers in there. It's just too far off the beaten track. It's too unknown. But if you were to offer something like a private concession, which gives you all that, well, first of all, gives you that privacy, and it just gives you a lot of freedom to be able to conduct safaris in a much more ad hoc manner, as opposed to a very structured, be home at this time, leave at that time, never go off the road, don't get out of your car.
Sure.
So I think that's got to be the way forward. It's interesting that Tanzania has obviously a long history of being a socialist country,
right?
Which has got many great benefits to it, but it doesn't look easily on private land.
Sure.
Inside a national park, which should be available to all Tanzanians. So I think that's where one of the sort of juxtapositions is in this concept. But I do think that if they really want to protect land, and we are happy to give it a try, we won't be able to attract the level of tourists without a concession model, in essence, unless we have these wonderful places like Usangu, right, which could work normally. But I think the future would be with a mixed model. You could take a national park and take areas of that national park where no one ever goes, where there are no roads and where no one's ever been, and say, hey, here's a chunk of land, but you guys have to look after it. You have to put in the roads. You have to maintain the roads. You have to put in the airstrips or whatever it might be. And there's a lot of other stuff that comes naturally when supporting the national parks people when you're in an area like that. So I think I see a lot of benefits. I understand the hesitation, But yeah, holding thumbs that going forward, everyone can clearly see what a fantastic model that can be. And it's not for everywhere. I'm not proposing this in the Serengeti at all. The Serengeti is what it is. I'm proposing it in distressed pieces of land that need another form of help.
It's kind of a hybrid balance model, if that makes any sense, for private and funding and local involvement.
Correct. And I think more and more, and I think this pandemic itself has exposed, the weakness of our business. The nice thing about a concession model is that once you tie it into that lease, you have to pay an annual fee whether you have one guest or 1,000 guests.
Exactly.
And so that's why I think it would also be a better support to, let's say, the lesser known parks of Tanzania and parts of those parks that are just, no one even goes there. I mean, we put our first road in. Up until now, since 2015, we've been getting slapped around by trees because there just aren't any roads. We've hand cut them, but they grow back every year.
Grow back really quick, yeah.
So we've put in our first road, and let's see. Hopefully, this thing takes off. I'm a big fan of this project that we're on. For me, it keeps me super interested in what's going on. And it's opening up opportunities that just weren't there before. And I tell you, some of these places that we kind of going to visit and have been, let's say, behind closed doors to hunters only in the past are magnificent tracts of land with unbelievable natural beauty and potential for wildlife to be way, way, way up there. Competing with the absolute best products in Africa, for sure.
Yeah, I think that it's just so exciting to be involved with something like this. It's so cutting edge, and in a destination like Tanzania that already is an iconic, umbrella as a hook to it. And people there are always going to be people that are going to be looking A, for something different, and B, to get involved. And I think that ticks all three of those boxes. So with a project of the magnitude of Usangu and everything that you've been doing and planning, I'd imagine that didn't happen overnight. Could you walk us through like the idea to start this and how it kind of took off to where it is today?
Sure. I suppose in essence, it started many years ago in about 2003. A good friend of mine, a guy called Greg Hughes, he's a professional guide, one of the better known guides in Africa. Him and I had a mission to drive from the Zibedianda Lagoon, which is the source of the Savuti Marsh, all the way down the Savuti Channel, and then into the marsh itself. And so we set off one morning, not really realizing that the Mahikwe sand ridge was actually like quite a considerable sand dune, and we tried to drive over it and then got pretty badly stuck. And while we were up there having a sundowner because we didn't have any other plan,
what else?
We were just chatting about the space, because from halfway up there you could see over the Mopani, and it's just this massive wilderness. And we both said to each other, one day we need to make sure that we somehow are custodians of a huge, huge chunk of this wilderness space. And so Greg and I are great friends. He carried on in the guiding mold, and I carried on more in the operations mold, and he sort of went off his direction. And we met up again in Asspirations. So he is the representative of our chief investor, what do you call principal investor of Southern Tanzania.
Right.
And pretty much his eyes and ears on Africa. So somehow we came back together. We were back in the same sort of space. And Greg has traveled extensively over, all of Africa. And, he gets the space thing. And it was actually him who convinced our investor that Southern Tanzania, was the right choice. And obviously with the backing of Vasilia and particularly Jeroen, who's our CEO, I was given the freedom and the opportunity to sort of push into these spaces to see how could we help in these areas, and how do you go about doing it. So without that getting stuck on the sand ridge, those many years ago, it might never have happened ever.
So more or less, when did that happen from the actual idea into the fruition now? How many years did it take?
It took 2003 to 2017, 14 years.
14 years, man. I mean, hey, if you believe in something, it'll happen.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't exactly that we said, it's going to be in Tanzania it's going to be in southern Tanzania. It wasn't quite like that, but it was a commitment to committing ourselves to some big tracts of wilderness and seeing how we could protect them 14 years ago. Yeah,
the broad commitment and the broad desire was there, and that never changed course.
No, and we both struck off in different directions. So,
Cool.
but came back.
No, I love that.
That's great.
Well, I mean, you're obviously doing everybody right for you. This is an unbelievable project. And I'm super excited to kind of blow the lid off this as much as I can in my little way. But maybe the future lies in corporate sponsorship. Ruaha brought by Nike.
Said that, but that is actually one of the paths that we're going down right now, is to see how we can better access some corporate sponsorship. Because if we had, let's say there's probably 8 months in a year that we can operate. If we had corporate social responsibility coming in there for, let's say, 2 or 3 of those months,
right,
and using those bed nights how they would like, whether it's for their own people or for their customers or as incentives or whatever. I think to be able to build a wildlife experience, a tourism wildlife experience from scratch, is almost unheard of in this modern age. And this is what people would be doing. We've put one road in there. We've got to put in, another 20 roads.
Yeah.
Find out, where are the lions most comfortable? Where would we have other camps if camps were going to come into this area? How does the boating work? Can you go there? Can you go there? It's a blank blueprint of which we are going to have to populate with a tourism product. So, yeah, I mean, it is really something that we're thinking of. The fact is, it's difficult to launch a tourism product that is completely unheard of in this time. And so, yeah. That is something that we'd be very interested in entertaining as corporate for a while.
I think it would work out budget-wise in terms of the huge amounts of money that these guys have to spend, and they're going to survive a pandemic. It's not going to be a problem. It's the people it's these smaller operations that are going to suffer the most, and it's going to we're not out of the end of this yet. So it's good that we do have these times. I hate to say it's good that we have these times, but at least if you look at it from a positive aspect, we're more creative with, it's like, okay, here are the problems. What creative solutions do we have? And what do we have within our network to put something together and build, like you said, build something from scratch that's never been done before.
Yeah. I mean, it has been done before, but we're talking, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years ago or whatever.
Right.
In this day and age, in a safe environment, with such an amazing landscape and potential for the wildlife to thrive in an area like that, it's got to be one of the most exciting projects available out there. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, if you were to, we've got to go a little bit in a little bit, but if you were to kind of summarize Usangu and its potential in just a few words, any parting comments for the guests, what would you say if you had to summarize Usangu?
Ultimate wilderness, like really ultimate wilderness, with a strong carrying capacity of interesting and unusual wildlife, not just all your normal stuff. Most of your normal stuff is there. And it's a place that needs help. It has been, it's been neglected. And that's no fault of the governments. It's just too vast.
Tanzania,
it's under pressure. And I have seen in the last 4 or 5 years a considerable change. On our first trip there, we saw 3 elephant bulls at night. This last trip, where I took a very, let's say, a high-end client who typically would only be in 5-star plus type accommodation. We saw about 4 or 5 different herds of elephants and lots of groups of bull elephants. Wow. And that for me is just already a massive indicator of an improved area. All the things are there. They're just behaving a little bit differently because they are usually threatened by humans. And what we're trying to do is turn that around.
Yeah. And that takes time and effort and a lot of patience and understanding. But, the right people will come to see Usangu with that in mind. And I think that's part of the thrill of the adventure of discovery.
Absolutely. At this stage, until year 5, we would like people who want to be part of the adventure. part of building a new legacy in a national park. And that when we step away in 5 years' time, hopefully that is, in a completely huge generation of revenue for the National Parks Authority. So they respect what's happened in there. And it's a fun and beautiful place for photographers and tourists and everyone to go and really enjoy a proper safari in the ultimate wilderness.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's incredible. And I can't wait to share this with the world. So Brandon, I thank you so much for coming on today. And we're going to put up the link for any inquiries. We do, Swaggy Swan Travel specializes in bespoke safaris, especially in Tanzania, where we arrange everything from A to Z. If you've liked what you've heard here, please click the subscribe below. Please give us a like. Send us some comments. We'd love to hear from you. And Brandon, man, have a wonderful day. And I hope your son's having fun at the skate park as we speak.
Yeah. Justin, I can't wait to see you leading that walk into the newly colored male lion.
Totally.
And that's an open invitation. We'd love to have you there.
I'm going to tell you right now, I'll do it. I'm going on publicly. I will absolutely do it.
Maybe we can get that on YouTube as well.
Yeah. Yes, that will be on YouTube.
All right, Justin, thank you so much. I really appreciate your interest in our project.
Absolutely, man. From the heart. Take care.
Cheers now.
Thank you for listening to Smart Aspirations. Justin Huff is the manager of Swaggy Swan Travel. For all travel-related inquiries, please visit www.swaggyswan.com. That's www.swaggyswan.com. And click inquiries. Have a stupendous day, and we'll see you next week.